Hello, friends. We continue with the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3. We shall share the first passage, that is, verses 1 to 6. Jesus heals the man with a withered hand on a Sabbath. We read the text. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. We have been reflecting on the 5 conflict stories. The first conflict begins in Mark chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. Jesus' authority to forgive the sins of the paralytic is questioned. Verses 13 to 17. The second conflict arises when Jesus associates with sinners and tax collectors, the call of Levi. Verses 18 to 22. The third conflict, where the issue is about Jesus' disciples not fasting. Verses 23 to 28. The fourth conflict is with regard to Jesus and his disciples violating the Sabbath law. The fifth conflict is this passage, that is, chapter 3, verses 1 to 6, which concerns the same Sabbath violation which we will deal with now. The passage begins with the words, "Jesus enters the synagogue again." It is most probably the same synagogue of Capernaum mentioned in chapter 1, verse 21. All these 5 conflict stories take place in Capernaum, where Jesus has made his base. The man with the withered hand. This man was not born with this sickness. Something happened in his life. Some illness or something took the strength out from his hand. An extra biblical source tells us that this man was a stonemason and that he requested Jesus to help him, for his livelihood was at stake. Without his hands functioning well, he couldn't work and he was ashamed to beg. Sabbath. All work on the Sabbath was forbidden, and to heal was to work. The Jews were so rigid with regard to the Sabbath observance that they would not even defend their lives on the Sabbath. But in cases of mortal danger, even the Pharisees made exceptions. But in this case, the man definitely was in no danger of losing his life. Jesus questions them. Is it against the law to do good on the Sabbath? If they answered in the affirmative, then they condemned themselves. They were seeking a reason on the Sabbath to kill Jesus. They intended to uphold the law, but they actually were going against the heart of the law by wanting to kill Jesus. The Pharisees joined hands with the Herodians. Normally, the two couldn't gang together, as the Pharisees isolated themselves from Gentiles or from persons who didn't keep the law. The Herodians were considered unclean. They were friends and supporters of Herod Antipas, ruler of Galilee, who were constantly in contact with the Romans. It is a strange thing that instead of complimenting Jesus for the good deed done, they were all out to destroy him. In Mark's Gospel, which was written to encourage the persecuted early Christian community, Jesus is also shown as being persecuted. From this chapter 3 itself, the plot to kill Jesus is already being hatched. This is the beginning of the opposition that will finally result in Jesus' death on the cross. The Pharisees were part of the delegations sent by the Sanhedrin, the official court of the Jews, from Jerusalem to keep a watch on Jesus. They would be seated in the front seats in the synagogues, watching Jesus' every move. Therefore, Jesus got angry. But Jesus does not let his anger prevent himself from doing good or deprive the person who is sick from benefiting. Jesus never took a day off from his work of healing and reaching out to people. He met the need as and when it arose. Just because a bunch of people were all out to get him did not deter him. His own motto in life was, "My Father is always working, and so am I." John 5:17. Verse 5 says, Jesus looked around at them with anger. How did Jesus deal with anger? What do we learn with regard to anger? Anger is an often misunderstood emotion. It is a legitimate feeling. By itself, anger is not bad. Being angry and feeling angry is not a problem. Ephesians 4:26 says, "Be angry but do not sin," or "Do not let your anger lead you to sin." Expressing anger is necessary. Otherwise, anger will turn into resentment and will explode. What is not right is hurting yourself or hurting others. We must try to understand anger and find ways to control it. Often, where there is anger, there is fear and many other different emotions lurking behind it. What really causes anger are a lot of underlying feelings like being overwhelmed, feeling nervous, disrespected, hurt, embarrassed, when expectations are not met, feeling lonely, sad, insecure, or just feeling exhausted. When we are angry, we must become aware of what is happening to us. We must not try to suppress anger all the while, but must give vent to it in the right manner. That is, try not to hurt yourself or hurt others. violence against oneself and against others is a definite no. Some suggestions on how to control or manage anger. These steps will need perseverance in application. Be aware of your feelings. Take deep breaths. Give the other person the benefit of doubt. That is, he or she may not be intentionally doing it. Take a long walk if possible, or use a punching bag to vent your anger. St. Francis de Sales struggled with controlling his anger for over a decade. It's always worth the effort. We often justify ourselves saying, even Jesus got angry. But Jesus' anger was righteous anger, not self-centered anger. It was not that Jesus was angry because his needs were not being met, but Jesus was angry because justice was not being done. The man who needed healing was being deprived under the pretext of observing the Sabbath law. What is anger? Anger is a response to our needs that have not been met. It could be a physical need, example hunger, or a psychological need, example someone does not respect you, so your status is hurt. Or it could be an emotional need, example when someone hurts you in public. Whatever may be the reason, results of anger are more painful than the reasons of anger. Anger is one of the capital sins, and it generates other sins and vices like hatred and a desire for revenge. Jesus mentions this in his Sermon on the Mount. Everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable to judgment. Matthew 5:22. We can't overcome any sin by ourselves. We need God's grace. The first condition to any healing is to admit that we are sick, that we are weak. Always tell God that I am a sinner and I need your help to be saved. Just as when we are falling, we need to hang on to something like a branch. So for any sin, we need to hang on to Jesus. To conclude, Mark chapter 3 verses 1 to 6. In this episode, Jesus debates with the Pharisees, and at the same time, he is able to heal. Jesus' opponents can't catch him in his words, nor match him in his deeds. Jesus is all powerful in word and in deed. Amen. Thank you.